You guys ready to go? We're going to have actually a couple of different speakers, so I just propose leaving the microphones right here.
Yes.
If that's okay with you guys. Who do we have in attendance? We got Jim,
WCT.
WWAY.
News 14,
Star News.
Port City, Star News. Okay, is she here for Fran?
Yes.
Okay, great. Is anybody live streaming?
We are.
Okay, great. Very good. Good afternoon. My name is Jon David. I'm the elected district attorney of Brunswick, Bladen, and Columbus counties. The purpose of this conference today is to update you on a status of the Leland police shooting incident, which occurred on December 9th, 2016. The last time I spoke to you about this incident, it was from the scene itself. It was less than 1 hour old. On the evening of December 16th, at approximately 8:51, Officer Schwank of the Leland Police Department encountered a man named Brent Quinn, and that ultimately resulted in a fatal shooting. At that time, I was able to personally respond to the scene. I was joined in that effort by my shooting review team, composed of Quentin McGee, who you'll hear from in a moment, as well as Assistant District Attorney Chris Thomas. When we arrived at the scene that night, we met with the Leland Police Chief, and together with him and our Sheriff John Ingram, we made a concurrent request for an SBI investigation. As District Attorney, I think it is vitally important that we have an outside and independent review anytime that we have an officer-involved shooting. It's vital for the administration of justice and to preserve public confidence that the people that we have looking at these incidents come from an outside agency. And so we embrace the process that we've employed many times before in asking the SBI to come in. Standing behind me today is Special Agent Mac Warner. He's the special agent in charge of the SBI here in the Coastal Division, as well as his lead agent in this case, Craig Moynihan. Also behind me is Lee Bollinger, our senior most assistant district attorney here in the 13th District, who, as in this case and countless others, has advised me on the appropriate course of action. I want to emphasize that in making decisions on police shooting matters, that the decision is bigger than one person, and I like to engage in a process first and then have a collaborative effort both with the law enforcement officers who are involved, as well as prosecutors in my office to make sure that we arrive at the right conclusions. I'm also mindful of the fact that the wheels of justice sometimes grind slowly. And so one of the things I have to balance as district attorney is being thorough on the one hand, and then being as efficient as possible to give the public answers to questions that might be lingering out there. It has now been just over a month, and we're in a position today to comment about this case publicly. And I want to say that the press frequently asks us in the days following an incident about comments about cases such as this. And I tell them what my oath and obligation requires, and that is we are not permitted to speak about the facts of pending investigations. District attorneys speak to investigations when they're closed, either through a court result or because an investigation has come to a conclusion. Last week in Bladen County, we were able to announce, for instance, that Dennis Marshall, who was involved in an officer-involved shooting in Bladen County last January, was convicted and got upwards of 20 years in prison for his role in shooting at officers in that jurisdiction. And so because that case was closed by a plea offer, we were able to send out a press release to those of you assembled today. This case is closed because the investigation has now come to its fitting end, and I'm able to share with you the facts of what happened as well as the legal conclusions we can draw from those facts. And so what I propose to do today is speak to you a little bit about process, then about the facts, and then about the legal conclusions. And in doing that, I hope we answer a lot of the public's questions or concerns about how we as public officials do our jobs and how these officers who investigate these matters do their jobs. Quite frankly, there's something else that needs to be addressed as well. When I arrived that evening and announced for an outside and independent review, the SBI was asked to look into whether or not Officer Schwank's use of deadly force was legally justified under the laws of the state of North Carolina. It should go without saying that had the suspect, Brent Quinn, lived, there would have been a parallel investigation to look into whether or not he violated any laws. And for reasons which we will detail momentarily, it is abundantly clear to me that had Brent Quinn lived, he would have certainly been the only one charged with any criminal offense that night, to include, among other things, the attempted murder of Officer Schwank. And so, again, we have followed a process in this case of arriving at the scene personally, that is the district attorney's office got there, helped spearhead this investigation, asked for an outside and independent review together with Leland Police Chief Mike James and Sheriff John Ingram, who were both on scene. And then we have worked over the holidays to be as thorough as possible. And we are standing before you today to give you answers as to what happened on that fateful night in December. This is a remarkable case. It's remarkable from the standpoint that this is the first time an officer has actually been shot in the line of duty since I've been district attorney. I've handled a number of other officer-involved shootings since I've been DA, but never in a situation where an officer was injured. I had the opportunity this morning to speak to Officer Schwenk. You should know that he's doing very well in his recovery, both mentally and physically. He does have a long road to go. From a physical standpoint, he was horrifically injured in his legs. He was shot 6 times, you will hear, during the course of this press conference. And so, as you might expect, the road to recovery is going to be a long one. But he's a fighter, and I have every confidence he is going to make a full recovery someday. Again, we talk about process, and that is involving an outside and independent review, getting the district attorney's office there, being as thorough as possible, interviewing people, processing the crime scene, doing an autopsy, and the things that you might expect would occur. And they produce facts. And so what I would do at this time is invite Assistant District Attorney Quentin McGee to the podium to share with you some of the facts of our investigation, and then we'll talk to you a little bit about the conclusions that are generated from those facts. So, Mr. McGee.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Quentin McGee, and I'm the Assistant District Attorney here in the 13th District. And as John mentioned, what I'm going to do now is share with you some of the facts and details surrounding the incident, the officer-involved shooting with Officer Swink. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation has completed its investigation in this matter, and what it has revealed is that the suspect, Brent Quinn, was involved in a verbal altercation with his girlfriend on December the 9th, 2016. Mr. Quinn was a resident of the Windsor Park community located in Leland, North Carolina. He left his residence driving a white Kia passenger vehicle. Shortly before 9 p.m., multiple 911 calls were received that described a vehicle fitting that description driving erratically located along Bridgeport Way, which is in the Windsor Park community in Leland, to include striking bushes located along the roadway, as well as nearly striking several mailboxes in that community. Within minutes, Officer Swink of the Leland Police Department responded to that location. He was able to locate the vehicle along a desolate cul-de-sac at the end of Bridgeport Way. As he located the suspect vehicle, Officer Swink approached it to inquire with the suspect. As he approached, Brent Quinn emerged unprovoked from the vehicle and produced a 9mm handgun and immediately began firing at Officer Swink. In the process, Officer Swink was shot 6 times, to include sustaining 1 gunshot wound to the chest, as well as 5 gunshot wounds to his legs. As he was struck, Officer Swink fell to the ground, and from a seated position, he was able to draw his service weapon and return fire upon Mr. Quinn. Officer Swink shot Brent Quinn 6 times, killing him. After shooting Mr. Quinn, Officer Swink was able to radio inform others that indeed there was an officer down along Bridgeport Way in Leland. Within minutes, officers from the Leland Police Department, as well as the Brunswick County Sheriff's Office, responded to that location and were able to provide assistance to Officer Swink. Officer Charles McGee, no relation, of the Leland Police Department, was able to apply a tourniquet to Officer Swink's leg, and that was instrumental in saving Officer Swink's life. It's worth noting that Officer Swink, who he himself was a former EMT, was actually taught Officer McGee through the process of applying the tourniquet. That tourniquet was instrumental in slowing the bleeding from Officer Swink's leg, which had been injured. The femoral artery had been injured and struck by a bullet fired by Mr. Quinn. A subsequent search of Brent Quinn's car revealed that there was another loaded handgun inside of that vehicle. And it was shortly after that when John Davis, Chris Thomas, and myself were notified of the events that had transpired there in Leland. And we coordinated ourselves and were able to travel to that location to begin to assist law enforcement and advise law enforcement of the appropriate response at that time. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation was called. and to begin their independent investigation, which began immediately there on the scene. It is that investigation that's taken us from that cold night along a lonely cul-de-sac in Leland to this moment today, where we're able now to share with you the facts and timeline of the events that transpired on December the 9th, 2016. That investigation is now complete, and the District Attorney's Office is now able to render a determination as to whether the use of force by Officer Swink on that occasion was justified. John.
And thank you, Mr. McGee. You know, the law of North Carolina is well settled from the standpoint that officers are justified in using deadly force to protect their own life or that of a third person when first being confronted with a deadly threat. In this case, the uncontroverted facts, which again are established by videotape evidence, clearly show that it was Mr. Quinn and he alone that first fired upon this officer. It's a bit of a perplexing response that results from apparently a domestic dispute that he had with his girlfriend in the hour preceding this incident. I've been asked frequently since this occurred, what was the motive? What happened? What is this about? And I will tell you that in this courtroom, we never have to prove motive. We have to prove criminal intent. And there's a meaningful difference in that. We frequently don't know why people do what they do. You can chase the ghost of why all over a courtroom and never catch it. As I stand before you today, I don't know what motivated Brent Quinn to do what he did, but I will tell you that we know exactly what happened. And it's very clear that for whatever reason, upon being confronted by Officer Schwenk, he made the fateful decision to pull out a gun and fire it multiple times at the officer before he even was able to return fire. I've also been asked, is this a situation that we hear so often in the press about a suicide by cop situation? That is, was Mr. Quinn baiting this officer into a situation where he'd be in a position to kill him? I would answer that question by saying I don't believe so. It looks very clear to me from the comprehensive investigation that was conducted here that Mr. Quinn had every intention on trying to kill this officer. And but for his training and experience and his ability to return fire from a seated position and reload his gun, he might have been killed himself. To be clear, not only are Officer Schwenk's actions legally justified, they're heroic. This man did exactly what his training and experience taught him to do. Instinct kicked in, and despite having suffered 6 gunshot wounds, he was able to produce his weapon, fire upon this suspect, and even reload in the course of this firefight. Had he not been able to do that, I don't know if he'd be here today. It is, quite frankly, a bulletproof vest, the skill of a surgeon, and the grace of God that Officer Schwenk is even among us today. And then, as Mr. McGee said, this tourniquet was instrumental in saving his life as well. You know, the surgeon that treated the officer has said that the femoral artery was severely damaged, and he might have bled out at the scene, but for the application of this tourniquet. And for that, Officer McGee is to be commended. And for that matter, there's a number of officers who deserve spectral recognition for what occurred that night. You know, they showed up in team-like fashion. The Brunswick County Sheriff's Office as well as the Leland Police Department. They were joined by a host of first responders in the medical community that rendered aid immediately to the condition of the officer, but also helped preserve the evidence for us at that time. You know, roped off a crime scene, locked down the videotape, secured the weapons, and made everything in such a way that we now have a much clearer picture of what transpired. You know, as district attorney, I frequently see the best and worst in human behavior. And to be sure, this was a savage attack perpetrated on an officer. But there was also acts of tremendous heroism that night by officers and medical personnel too numerous to mention. I do want to especially recognize Officer McGee for having applied that tourniquet. And there will come a time and place when we can appropriately acknowledge them in another forum. The goal of the press conference today is really to share with you the facts underlying my determination that this shooting was legally justified, it was authorized by law, and the only person who violated any criminal laws that night was Mr. Quinn. Had Mr. Quinn lived, he would have been charged with attempted murder, as well as a host of other firearm-related offenses directed to law enforcement officer. At this point, we still do not have the toxicology results back concerning what Mr. Quinn's blood alcohol level was that night. Our investigation reveals that he had been drinking rather extensively in the hours preceding this incident. And while that fact would certainly be important for us to ultimately receive, it is not going to be determinative to my decision. It's not going to change anything about our view that this is an appropriate use of deadly force. It should also go without saying that because Mr. Quinn was killed in this incident, any charges against him would be abated by death, and that is also the reason we did not ask for a criminal investigation concerning his behavior. But this inquiry has certainly revealed that he violated the law. Officer Schwank is a hero as far as I'm concerned. He is somebody that honored his oath and obligation. Officers do a very dangerous job, and they keep us safe literally while we're sleeping. It was a cold night that night, and he was out there discharging his duty. He confronted a threat that he would have had no idea, I think, as he approached that car, what this person was capable of. And he is to be commended for his quick action in saving his own life. He's truly a hero. I had the opportunity to tell him that this morning. I spoke with him by phone. He's in very good spirits. He is convalescing from his injuries, but he seems to be doing very well mentally, and physically he is recovering. When I told him that he was a hero, he actually disagreed with that. He said, "I'm not a hero, I'm a survivor." I actually disagree, though. I think he is very much a hero. And for that matter, there are many heroes that were out there that night. You know, it occurs to me as district attorney that in this age where officers have renewed scrutiny, and there's a lot of people that say bad things about our law enforcement community, it is well that we should recognize when they actually do a good job and when they do acts of heroism. And so I'm very proud to work with the Leland Police Department and the Brunswick County Sheriff's Office. And for that matter, I'm thrilled to be, once again, working so closely with the SBI to ensure that we have a good investigation which generates credible results. It was actually Officer Appreciation Day on Monday this past week, and so I would like to publicly acknowledge that we do appreciate the service and sacrifice which goes with wearing a badge, and nowhere was that more evident than on the night of December 9th when an officer almost lost his life. Mercifully, he wasn't killed, but to the extent that he was injured, we should all remember that Jacob Schwank took a bullet for this community, and for that we should be grateful. With that, I would entertain any questions from the press about our legal conclusions or factual findings. Are there any questions? Yes, Lindsay.
Are you all releasing what specific kind of guns Quinn had? More specifics on his vehicle? Are you releasing his girlfriend's name? Did he have a license for those guns that were in his vehicle?
Yeah, Mr. Quinn had a concealed weapon permit. There were two guns, only one of which was used in this incident. They were both 9mm guns, and I believe they were 6 hours. They were both pretty high dollar weapons that were in operating condition. As for his part, Mr. Quinn was a trained military man and had previously been in the Marines. The car that he was in was either a 2014 or 2015 Kia, white in color. His girlfriend's name, I think, has previously been released.
Okay.
Do we know? I'd have to get that to you tonight. Are there any other questions?
How long did the gun exchange take place?
Well, as you might expect, these things, they probably feel like a lifetime, but it takes place relatively quickly. I'd say inside of 10 seconds, the entire firefight was over. And what was remarkable is that Officer Schwank was able to reload his gun from a seated position after he'd already been shot 6 times. And it was during that second volley of shots that he was actually able to kill Mr. Quinn, who was advancing upon him. And so it's remarkable that his instincts and training allowed him to act in the way that he did. It certainly, I believe, saved his own life. You know, there's something else I would like to tell you as district attorney as well, and that is there are a number of stakeholders in whatever decisions that we make. Among them, of course, are Mr. Quinn's family and people that would have questions about what happened with the officer use of force. And I take my obligation very seriously to speak to them and be as communicative and transparent as possible. On Monday of this week, I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Quinn's ex-wife and have a telephone conversation with his mother and sister who reside in Wisconsin. At that point, I shared with them the results of the investigation that had transpired to this point. Told them that, in our opinion, this was a legally justified shoot, and further expressed the view that if Mr. Quinn had lived, he would have been charged in a show of ultimate transparency, I also offered them the ability, in my discretion, to make an examination of the entire SBI file if they want to do that in the future, to include watching the videotape as well. If they have any questions about the accuracy of what we're saying now, I invite them to come make a full review of this investigation to confirm that what we were saying is accurate. Again, we don't know why Mr. Quinn did what he did, but we know what he did, and he's certainly the bad actor in this case. Yes, Lindsay?
Which leg was tourniquet?
I believe it was the right leg. He was shot 3 times in the right leg, so I have to assume it was that one.
And does he remain in the hospital, and are they releasing?
That's a great question. One of the things that slowed down our investigation is that this officer was convalescing from his injuries over an extended period of time. He is now out of the hospital. He's still wheelchair bound, and we hope that he makes a full recovery. He's not able to completely use his right leg at this point. That's just going to be a slow recovery process. He was interviewed for the first time by the SBI yesterday. As district attorney, I was reluctant to make a final determination on this case until the officer had actually been interviewed. And so he was finally in a medically cleared situation where he could speak to what happened in this case. And so we acted very quickly, armed with a complete investigation, to literally gin up this press conference within 24 hours of this final interview being conducted. The only thing, in my view, that's still outstanding is the results of the toxicology results of Mr. Quinn. And again, while it might help explain his behavior, it's certainly not going to excuse it regardless of the results. So I feel comfortable at this time releasing the information and making a legal determination.
What was the Quinton's family response to your conversation?
Actually, I was touched by their humanity. They're certainly grieving the loss of their son, brother. But having said that, they were also expressed genuine concern for the officer and his well-being. And I think they were very understanding of the fact that we've been thorough, that we've been transparent, that we reached out to them. And I think they were heartened by the fact that we have a continuing dialogue with them and have invited them literally to come into our office and check our math. And so, it was a good conversation. Of course, it's a difficult conversation, but I think they're, at this point, understanding of where things are and somewhat at peace with the situation. They're still grieving the loss of a loved one.
Have they released where he was shot, or Quinn has been shot, and which one was the fatal blow?
The results of the autopsy, I don't believe have been published yet. I would certainly would make those available to the press if you'd like to see them. Our information is that he's been shot 6 times, including twice in the face. The fatal shots, we believe, struck Mr. Quinn in the face. And again, based on our review of the videotape, which is corroborated by interviews, we believe that was in the second volley of shooting after he was able to reload.
Would you be able to confirm his age?
We can do that at a later time. I don't have that right now. You're talking about the suspect's age?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Brett Quinn was 43 years old.
There you have it. Again, if there's nothing else, I want to thank you for being here today. As district attorneys and as investigators, I believe that transparency breeds trust, and we discharge our oath the best when we are able to stand in front of our community and answer questions about what happened and what it means legally. I hope you understand that it's a slow process, it's a deliberative process, and for us, we embrace the same approach regardless of what the facts are. Whether it's a Dennis Marshall situation where he's charged and it takes a year to conclude, or it's a situation now where approximately a month later we can speak to it. While the investigations always turn on the unique facts, our process and approach never wavers. And I'm very proud of the fact that representatives from my office were on scene, working in team-like fashion with law enforcement from a very early stage. Once again, I have to commend Mac Warner and his folks at the SBI for being out there and doing yeoman's work on a very cold night to get us the information we need to make this declaration. And so thank you to the SBI, and thank you all for being here.